Wow, looks like someone's been doing their homework. We've got a whole stack of info here about anxiety and depression, mostly from this Anxiety and Depression Workbook for Dummies.
I know, right? Looks like we're about to do a deep dive into all things anxiety and depression.
And I think that's perfect because so many people struggle with these things. Maybe
Yeah.
we can help our listeners sort through it all and maybe even find some helpful stuff along the way.
Definitely. And you know what I think is really interesting is how the book starts out. It says right away that anxiety and depression are way more than just like feeling a little sad or stressed.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, we all have those feelings sometimes, but when does it become something more serious? When does it start to, really affect your life?
Exactly. And the book has all these everyday examples like, imagine you're stuck in traffic,
Oh, I hate that.
right? Most people just get annoyed, right? But someone who's struggling with anxiety, that traffic jam could trigger a full-blown panic attack. Or think about something like paying bills. That's a normal thing everyone has to do. But for someone with anxiety, it can turn into this huge worry about debt and, like financial ruin.
Yeah, I can see how that could happen. And what about the self-criticism? The book talks a lot about that, how some people are just way too hard on themselves.
Right. And everyone is self-critical sometimes, but it's the intensity and how often it happens. Like it's not just having a bad day. It's, this constant
It's
negativity.
like you can't escape it.
Right. And they actually have this quiz in the book, the negative thinking quiz.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
And it has these questions like, um, do you often feel hopeless? Or like, do you worry constantly about things you can't control? It makes you think. The more you agree with those statements, the more you might need to pay attention to what's going on in your mind.
It's like a wake-up call. Okay, so then where does all this anxiety and depression come from? Is it just bad luck, bad genes?
Well, that's what I love about chapter 2. It lays out this idea that there's not just one cause, but actually three main things that kind of, work together in different ways.
Oh, okay. So it's like a recipe for anxiety. What are the ingredients?
Okay, so first there's biology, and genetics are a big part of that.
Genetics. So you mean like it can be inherited?
Exactly. You know how like you can inherit a risk for heart disease or high blood pressure? Well, you can also inherit tendencies toward anxiety and depression. It's in your genes.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. So it's not just about your upbringing or environment.
Right, it's more complex than that. But think about it. If you knew heart disease ran in your family, you'd probably be more careful about your diet and exercise, right? Well, it's the same with mental health. Knowing you have a family history of anxiety or depression could be really helpful. It might help you understand why you're struggling. The book even suggests having open conversations with your family about mental health just to see if there are any patterns.
That's a great idea. It puts things into perspective. So, okay, genetics play a role, but that can't be the whole story, right? Because life throws all sorts of curveballs at everyone.
Of course, that's where the second factor comes in, your personal history. All those experiences, especially from childhood, can really shape how you deal with stress later on.
Yeah, makes sense. Like if you grew up in a really chaotic or stressful environment, that could definitely affect you as an adult.
Exactly. The book is an example of this guy named Tyler, who grew up in a really critical and kind of emotionally distant household. And so, he learned to just kind of withdraw and shut down whenever things got tough.
Oh, wow. So it's like a coping mechanism, but it becomes a problem later on.
Right. It became his go-to response. Even as an adult, whenever he felt stressed or overwhelmed, he would just shut down.
So we've got genetics, we've got childhood experiences. What's the third thing?
The third big factor is current stressors, the things that are happening in your life right now that are causing stress. And everyone experiences stress, but it's about the intensity and how long it lasts, and also how you cope with it. That can really make a difference.
So like if you're dealing with a job loss or a serious illness, that's going to be a lot more stressful than, say, missing your bus.
Exactly. And the book has this really cool current culprit survey that helps you pinpoint those stressors.
I like that. I like anything that helps me get organized.
It's a great tool. It lists things like job pressures, relationship problems, money worries, health issues, all that stuff. It makes you realize how much you might be juggling at once.
Oh, yeah. And when you see it all laid out like that, it's no wonder people feel overwhelmed. So, okay, we have these three big things: biology, personal history, and current stressors. But what about when people know they're struggling, but they just can't seem to, you know, change? They feel stuck.
Right. It's not always as simple as just deciding to feel better. Chapter 3 digs into this idea of change-blocking beliefs, which are basically these deep-seated assumptions that we have that can actually sabotage our efforts to get better.
Change blocking beliefs. What does that even sound like?
Well, it's things like, I always mess things up, or I'm too exhausted to even try changing. The book makes this point that these beliefs can become self-fulfilling prophecies.
Oh, I see what you mean. So it's like if you believe you're incapable of change, then you're not going to even try.
Exactly. And it's not always a conscious choice either.
So it's like even when you want to get better, there's something holding you back.
Right. And the book even introduces this idea of self-sabotage, those unconscious actions that, keep us from dealing with our problems. Yeah. It's pretty powerful stuff. But here's the big question. If our thoughts are so powerful, can we actually change them? Like, is that even possible?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. And that's where the book gets really interesting. It's like it introduces this whole world of cognitive therapy.
Okay, cognitive therapy. I've heard of that.
Yeah. Part 2 is all about this idea that our thoughts have a huge impact on our feelings.
So like if you can change your thoughts, you can change how you feel.
Exactly. And it's not about just trying to be positive all the time or ignoring your problems. It's more about understanding how your thoughts work and learning to work with them.
Okay, I'm listening. Give me an example.
Okay, so the book gives this example in chapter 5. It says, imagine you hear a noise in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And you immediately think, oh my God, it's a burglar.
Yeah, that would be scary.
Right, so your heart starts racing, you feel terrified, but then you realize, oh, it was just the wind.
Oh, thank goodness.
Right. But see, it wasn't the actual event, the noise, that caused the fear. It was your interpretation of it, your thought, that created that feeling of fear.
That's so true. It's like our minds just jump to the worst case scenario sometimes.
Yeah, and the book gives all these tools for how to hit the brakes on that. It talks about these things called information reality scramblers.
Yeah.
They're basically these mental distortions, like little tricks our minds play on us.
Information reality scramblers, that's a mouthful.
Right. It's kind of a funny name. But they're these thought patterns that, can really twist our perceptions.
Okay, so give me some examples of these scramblers.
Well, one that's super common is filtering.
Yeah.
That's when you only focus on the negative stuff and completely ignore anything positive.
Oh, yeah. I know people like that. It's like no matter what good things are happening, they only see the bad.
Exactly. It's like they're wearing these negativity glasses, and then there's overgeneralizing.
Overgeneralizing, okay.
Yeah, it's taking one bad experience and you apply it to your whole life.
Yeah.
You fail one test and suddenly you think you're a failure at everything.
Oh my gosh, I've totally been there.
Right. It's so easy to do. Oh, and another big one is catastrophizing.
Ooh, that sounds intense.
It is. It's basically when you blow things way out of proportion, a small setback becomes a sign that your whole life is falling apart.
Yeah, that's not helpful.
Not at all. It just creates more anxiety. So, recognizing these scramblers is the first step. And then the book offers all these strategies for how to fight back against them, how to retrain your brain to think more realistically.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we get rid of these negative thought patterns?
Well, one exercise that I found really helpful is called the label replacement exercise. It focuses on those really harsh negative labels we often give ourselves, calling yourself a failure or stupid or unlovable. The book calls them loathsome labels.
Ouch, those are tough. I definitely have some loathsome labels I need to work on.
Right. We all do. And the thing is, these labels can really stick with you and affect your self-esteem.
So is the exercise about, replacing those negative labels with positive ones?
It's more about finding labels that are more balanced and realistic. Recognizing that you're not defined by your mistakes or shortcomings. It's a process, but the book gives you some good steps to get started.
I like that. It's like giving yourself a mental makeover. So, okay, we're changing our thoughts, but what about actually doing something about anxiety and depression?
You hit the nail on the head. Part 3 of the book gets into the action side of things. It's like you can't just think your way out of these conditions. You have to actually take action.
Okay, action. I like that. What kind of actions are we talking about?
Well, one that's really powerful, but maybe a little scary, is facing your fears head on.
Ooh. Like exposure therapy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It seems counterintuitive, right? If you're scared of something, the natural instinct is to avoid it.
Totally.
But the book makes this point that the more you avoid something, the scarier it becomes in your mind. It's like this big, scary monster under the bed.
So you have to turn on the light and see that it's just a pile of laundry.
Exactly.
Okay, I get it. But what about those days when you're just like too overwhelmed to even think about facing your fears?
There's something for those days too. Believe it or not, exercise can be a huge help, even if it's just like a light walk or some stretching.
Really? I thought you had to do like intense workouts to get any benefit.
Nope, any movement helps. It releases endorphins, which have mood-boosting effects.
Okay, that's good to know because sometimes when I'm feeling really down, all I want to do is like curl up on the couch and watch TV.
I get that. But the book talks about the importance of doing things you enjoy, even when you don't feel like it.
So like finding ways to bring a little joy into your life, even when it's hard.
Exactly. Things like, spending time with loved ones, doing a hobby, taking a bath, listening to music, whatever brings you pleasure, even if it's just for a little while.
It's like those little things can make a big difference. Okay, so we've got facing your fears, we've got exercise, we've got enjoyable activities. What else?
Well, there's a whole chapter on mindfulness, which is all about paying attention to the present moment without judgment.
Mindfulness, yeah. That's one of those words that gets thrown around a lot, isn't it? Just like meditation.
It's related to meditation, but it's broader than that. It's really about, like, noticing your thoughts and feelings without getting swept away by them.
So it's not about like emptying your mind or anything.
Not necessarily. It's more about just observing what is, like your breath, your body, your surroundings, without labeling it as good or bad.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. But how does mindfulness actually help with anxiety and depression?
Well, when you're anxious or depressed, your mind tends to get kind of hijacked by negativity. You're either dwelling on the past or worrying about the future. And mindfulness helps break that cycle by bringing you back to the present.
It's like hitting the pause button on those racing thoughts.
Exactly. And the book has all these simple but really helpful exercises for cultivating mindfulness. One that I thought was really cool is called the Mind Chatter Turned on Its Head exercise.
Mind chatter turned on its head. Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's basically you pay attention to your negative self-talk, all those mean things you say to yourself, and then you imagine saying those same things to a close friend.
Ugh, that would be harsh.
Right. It helps you see how judgmental and unkind your inner critic can be.
So it's about being kinder to yourself.
Exactly. Cultivating more self-compassion.
I like that. What about when those negative thoughts just won't go away? Like those worries that keep popping up no matter how hard you try to push them down?
The book suggests trying the thank you mind exercise.
Thank you, mind. Okay.
I know, it sounds a little strange, but it's basically about thanking your mind for those thoughts and then letting them go.
Wait, thanking your mind for negative thoughts? How does that work?
It's about shifting your relationship with those thoughts.
Yeah.
Instead of fighting them or getting all tangled up in them, you just acknowledge them and then you choose to move on.
So it's kind of like saying, thanks for sharing, but I'm not buying what you're selling right now.
Exactly. And it can be surprisingly effective. But mindfulness isn't just about managing thoughts, it's also about being present with your feelings.
Even the uncomfortable ones.
Yes. The book emphasizes that avoiding those difficult feelings actually makes them stronger. It encourages you to kind of like embrace those feelings, observe them without judgment.
So instead of saying, I shouldn't be feeling this way, you just allow yourself to feel it.
Right. It's about recognizing that feelings are temporary. They come and go like waves in the ocean.
And I guess the more you resist those waves, the more likely you are to get knocked over and pulled under.
Perfect analogy. The book has this exercise called Embracing Present Moments. It guides you to focus on your breath and just notice the physical sensations of your emotions, like, the tightness in your chest, the racing heart, the churning stomach, without labeling them as good or bad.
It's like becoming a scientist of your own experience, just observing your emotions with curiosity instead of fear.
I love that. And the cool thing about mindfulness is that you can practice it anywhere, anytime. The book suggests trying it while you're eating.
Eating?
Yeah, instead of just mindlessly shoveling food in, slow down and pay attention to the colors, the textures, the flavors. Really savor each bite.
Oh, wow. I'm so guilty of just like inhaling my food sometimes. I'll have to try that.
It's a game changer. And you can do it with walking too. Instead of rushing to get somewhere, pay attention to the sensations of your feet hitting the ground, the movement of your body, the sights and sounds around you.
It's like turning an everyday activity into a mini meditation. Okay, this is great. So we've got a lot of tools for dealing with thoughts and feelings. But what about sleep? Because, when I'm anxious or depressed, sleep is usually the first thing to go.
Oh, I hear you. Sleep problems are so common with anxiety and depression. It's like a vicious cycle. You're stressed, so you can't sleep, and then the lack of sleep makes your anxiety and depression worse.
It's exhausting.
It really is. But luckily, the book has a whole chapter on sleep, and it starts by acknowledging that anxiety and depression can definitely mess with your sleep. But then it gives you all these strategies for how to get back on track.
Okay, give me some tips. I need my sleep.
Well, one of the most important things is to create a consistent sleep routine.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that before. Going to bed and waking up at the same time every day, even on weekends.
Exactly. I know it's easier said than done. But it's all about regulating your body's natural sleep-wake cycle.
So you're basically training your body to sleep better.
That's a good way to put it. The book also talks about having a relaxing bedtime routine. Like no screens for an hour before bed, taking a warm bath, maybe reading a book, or listening to some calming music.
It's like setting the mood for sleep.
Exactly. And then making sure your bedroom is like a sleep sanctuary.
A sleep sanctuary. I like that.
Yeah, it should be cool, dark, and quiet.
So like investing in some blackout curtains, maybe a white noise machine.
Exactly. And then if worries are keeping you up at night, the book suggests keeping a worry journal. You just write down all your anxieties before bed, get them out of your head and onto the page.
It's like giving your worries a place to go so they're not bouncing around in your mind all night.
Exactly. And if that doesn't work, you can always try some relaxation techniques, like those breathing exercises we talked about earlier, or progressive muscle relaxation.
Okay, those are good tips. But what about nightmares? Because sometimes those wake me up and then I can't fall back asleep.
That's interesting. The book actually has an exercise for that. It's called the nightmare elimination exercise.
Okay, I have to hear this. Tell me everything.
So basically, you write down your nightmare in as much detail as you can remember. What happened, how you felt, all of it. And then, get this, you rewrite the nightmare with a happier ending.
So you're basically giving your nightmare a makeover.
Exactly. It's about taking back control and changing the narrative.
Okay, I'm definitely trying that. So we've talked a lot about lifestyle changes and things like that. But what about medication? I know that's a big topic when it comes to mental health.
Yeah, it definitely is. And the book doesn't shy away from it at all. There's a whole chapter dedicated to exploring the role of medication in managing anxiety and depression.
So is medication the answer? Like, should everyone with anxiety or depression be on meds?
Well, the book is really clear that it's not a black and white issue. The decision to take medication is a personal one, and it should always be made in consultation with a healthcare professional.
So it's not something you should just decide based on, like, what your friends are doing or what you read online.
Right, it's more complicated than that. The book emphasizes that it's important to be an informed consumer, understanding the potential benefits and risks, knowing the different types of medications available, being aware of potential side effects. It's all about having an open and honest conversation with your doctor.
So it's about finding what works best for you.
Exactly. What works for one person might not work for another. And the book even gives you a form for tracking your progress if you do decide to take medication, as well as any side effects you might be experiencing.
Oh, that's helpful.
Yeah, it's called the side effect tracking form. You basically just keep track of any side effects you have, how severe they are, and how they're affecting your life.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And then does the book talk about like combining medication with other treatments?
Oh, absolutely. It stresses that medication is often most effective when it's paired with things like therapy, lifestyle changes, and all those strategies we've been talking about.
So it's not a magic bullet. It's one part of a bigger plan.
Right. Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground, but there's one more really important piece of the puzzle that we need to talk about.
Oh, okay. What's that?
Relationships.
Relationships.
Yeah, they can play a huge role in both our vulnerability to and resilience against anxiety and depression.
Okay. I'm definitely interested to hear more about that.
Yeah. So relationships, right, they can be like our biggest source of support, but they can also be a huge source of stress. You know what I mean?
Oh, totally. I think we've all experienced that. Like, good relationships can really lift you up, but when there's conflict or negativity, it can really bring you down.
Exactly. And the book talks about how anxiety and depression can actually affect your relationships, sometimes in ways you don't even realize.
Oh, wow. So it's not just that relationships affect your mental health, but your mental health can affect your relationships too. It's like a two-way street.
Right. It's like this whole interconnected thing. And in chapter 15, there's this questionnaire, and it asks all these questions about your relationships, like, have you withdrawn from your relationships?
Yeah.
Or are you less affectionate than you used to be?
Yeah.
It even asks if you've become more irritable or critical.
Wow, those are some tough questions.
Yeah, it makes you think, right?
Yeah, it's like it makes you take a step back and look at how your anxiety or depression might be affecting the people you care about.
Exactly. It's not about blaming yourself. It's more about just becoming aware of those patterns, you know? Like, oh, wow, I have been really snappy with my partner lately.
Yeah, I think we all do that sometimes. So once you recognize those patterns, how do you fix things?
Well, the book has a bunch of strategies, but one that I found really helpful is called the daily news exercise.
Daily news. Okay, what's that?
It's pretty simple, but it's about setting aside time each day to talk to your partner about, both the good and the bad stuff that's happening, like your thoughts, feelings, events, all of it.
So it's like a designated time to just check in with each other and be really open and honest.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be a big formal thing. It could be while you're picking dinner, taking a walk, or just hanging out on the couch.
Okay, that makes sense. So instead of letting things bottle up, you're making a conscious effort to communicate, even when it's hard.
Exactly. It's about staying connected. And it's not just about complaining either. It's about sharing the good stuff too, expressing appreciation, celebrating each other's successes.
Yeah, because relationships aren't all about fixing problems. It's also about enjoying each other's company and being supportive.
Absolutely. And speaking of appreciation, there's this other exercise that's all about writing down all the things you appreciate about your partner.
Ah, that's sweet. What's it called?
It's called the top 12 things I appreciate about my partner. You write them all down, and then you share them with your partner.
It's like a love letter. I love it. Okay, but what about when things get tough? Like, how do you handle conflict in a healthy way?
Well, chapter 16 is all about managing conflict. And it starts by talking about how defensiveness is like the biggest roadblock to good communication.
Yeah, defensiveness is a killer. When you feel attacked or misunderstood, it's like this wall goes up and you
Yeah.
can't even hear what the other person is saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the book gives this technique called checking it out.
Okay, checking it out. What's that?
It's about pausing before you get defensive and instead asking for clarification. Like instead of snapping back with, that's not true, or you're being unfair, you might say something like, help me understand what you mean by that, or can you give me an example?
So it's about like taking a breath and trying to understand where the other person is coming from.
Exactly. And it doesn't mean you agree with them, but it's about being open to their perspective.
It's about being curious rather than combative.
I like that. Curious rather than combative. And you know what else can be helpful? Remembering those life lenses we talked about earlier.
Oh yeah, the ones that shape how we see ourselves and the world.
Right. Well, the book talks about how understanding your partner's life lenses can help you navigate conflict.
So like, if you know your partner has a tendency toward anxiety, you might be more patient and understanding when they're feeling stressed.
Exactly. It's about meeting them where they are. And it also works the other way around, too.
Oh, right, because you're looking at your partner through your lens and they're looking at you through theirs.
Right. And the book encourages you to be curious about how your own life lenses might be, like, distorting your perceptions or contributing to conflict.
So it's like taking off those tinted glasses and trying to see things more clearly.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked a lot about relationships, but I think there's one more thing we need to touch on, and it's a tough one. Dealing with loss.
Oh, yeah, that is a hard one. Whether it's a breakup, a divorce, or the death of a loved one, loss can be incredibly painful.
It really can. And the book doesn't sugarcoat it. It acknowledges that grief, sadness, anger, all those feelings, they're normal and natural.
So it's not about trying to get over it quickly or pretending you're not hurting.
Right. It takes time to heal. And the book emphasizes the importance of seeking support. Whether it's from friends, family, a therapist, or a support group, you don't have to go through it alone.
It's about letting people help you.
Yes. And it also gives some practical advice for moving forward, like, focusing on self-care, doing things that bring you joy, and reconnecting with your values and goals.
So it's about honoring the loss, but also finding a way to keep living your life.
Beautifully said. And that actually brings me to the last point I want to make. The book reminds us that overcoming anxiety and depression isn't just about getting rid of symptoms. It's about creating a life that's meaningful and fulfilling.
So it's not just about surviving, it's about thriving.
Exactly. And that looks different for everyone. But it starts with, figuring out what brings you joy, what gives you a sense of purpose, what you want to contribute to the world.
So finding your passion and going after it.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to encourage you to think about what resonated most with you today. And what's one small step you can take to move towards greater well-being? And remember, you're not alone on this journey.
This has been a really insightful conversation. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into anxiety and depression. Until next time.